بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بالبداية نتقدم بالشكر الجزيل إلى المركز العربي للأبحاث ودراسة السياسات على إقامة هذا المنتدى بشكل دوري وبشكل منتظم للسنة السابعة على التوالي، على الرغم من ظروف الجائحة، إلا أن الأخوة الأفاضل في المركز أبوا إلا أن يستمر هذا المنتدى عبر تطبيق زوم. يعني وأيضا نتقدم بالشكر أيضا إلى هذا التطبيق الذي جمعنا وخلانا نشوف حتى أقربائنا وأصدقائنا، يعني حتى اللي من داخل الكويت اللي ما كان الحظر منعنا من أن نشوفهم، شفناهم عبر شاشات زوم. فشكرا جزيلا للمركز وشكرا لزوم لهذه التقنية التي جمعتنا بكم.
You have the opportunity to do so. Today we are starting the second session of our we have 3 papers today. I will start with Dr. Mohammad Al-Rumaihi. I will not spend any time giving introductions so that we can benefit from the papers themselves, but I want to repeat what the director has said. If you have any questions, please write down your question in the Q&A for those who are joining us from outside the forum, and make it short and pointed, and specify to whom you're directing your question is by name so that we know. Also, you can please make your questions short and pointed so to give us a better chance of responding. And I beg your pardon, ladies and gentlemen, and the panelists first, that I will have to interrupt when you come to the last 3 minutes. You each are allowed 15 minutes. When you get to the 12th or 13th minute, I'll interrupt you just to remind you that you have 2-3 minutes to give you a chance to wind down and finish off your presentation. We will start with our dear friend, Dr. Mohammad Ghnem Al-Rumaihi. It will be difficult to interrupt him unless he allows me to do so. Just before he finishes his 15 minutes, Dr. Al-Rumaihi will be speaking about Gulf-Iranian relations, foundations, and future prospects. And please mute your microphones so that we get no interference. Thank you very much, Dr. Yacoub. You can interrupt me anytime. You are a dear friend. We used to attend the same class. We were classmates in the past. I would also like to thank our colleagues at the Arab Center for making sure that we meet even virtually under the current circumstances, which is exceptional by all means. Of course, we all recognize the efforts made by the Arab Center to enrich the Arabic culture and spirit of discussion. The paper is there for those who want to read it. Maybe it will be published in the future, but for the purposes of this presentation, I'll give you a quick summary of the paper itself. First of all, I want to emphasize the fact that personally, and I don't think many people in the Gulf area harbor any negative feelings towards the Iranian people or Iranian peoples. They are, after all, close neighbors. They live in the near vicinity of our countries, and we have long-standing relations with them. My criticism, if any, will be directed towards the current administration, the current political system. These are policies, in our point of view, whether personal or the general public, they require some more rationality injected into them. I'll start by saying, how has the situation got to where we are now? I think the problem relies in the modern Middle Eastern state. Unfortunately, this state, after independence and the post-colonial era, whether in Iran or in the Arab countries, have not managed to achieve the civilizational objectives that they should have achieved. Iran, for example, in the 70s, in the days of the Shah, and after the boom in the oil prices in 72, 73, the Shah come up with a reform program which relied on social reform and not economic reform. So therefore, it was inevitable that some social forces were there resisting this reform project. The economic forces in that time and the religious forces opposed this project from the social point of view of reforms. The mistakes by the Shah, Gaddafi, Bin Ali, and others, their mistake was they did not, the Shah did not allow the opportunity for the enlightened sections of his society to come up with reform, political reform for sure. So he had three forces acting as the opposite to him: the religious conservatives, the liberals, and the economic conservatives. So, to what extent I used to follow events closely at the days of the Iranian Revolution, who I met many Iranians who said to us they want from Khomeini to issue an edict or a fatwa to bring out 1 million demonstrators to protest, but even if he does that, we will take over and rule the country. They had such short-sighted policies. The second aspect was the wrong attitude by the Europeans and the Americans in 1953 with the failed attempt, the coup d'etat attempt against Mossadegh, and even Obama's latest book seems to indicate that the CIA was behind that coup attempt, and despite the many writings on this, the coup itself has failed, and Kashani and other religious figures. Kashani was the main religious figure in Tehran. He incited the masses against Mossadegh under the pretext that Mossadegh was a communist. This was all part and parcel of the Cold War between and the struggle between capitalism and communism and socialism. And consequently, the ayatollahs or religious figures came to rule the country. They did not come or not created in a vacuum. There was literature in Egypt by the Muslim Brotherhood and other sources which were against the colonial hegemony and seeking a different kind of a ruling system. I think the biggest problem with our brothers in the Iranian regime that in the last 40 years or so, the project they led in the last 40 years or so is a project which has no future, in my opinion, because it relies on sayings or statements based on many illusions and myths, which in this day and age can believe that somebody has taken the approval from God Almighty to rule in His name. I think this warrants a lot of discussion. Externally and apparently, the system appears to be democratic, but in reality, whoever is nominated for any position or any candidate cannot go ahead with their candidacy without the approval of the supreme leader or the higher ranking state organizations. This has generated a lot of problems. On the other hand, in order to protect this system, which in my estimation, the system without any future, the protection of the system requires expansion into the neighboring countries like Iraq, Yemen, and Syria. And in this scene, we find a number of contradictions. In fact, how can you, for example, side with a revolutionary group like the Houthis, as the Iranians say, and at the same time support a dictatorial regime like that of Bashar al-Assad regime? The compass here is driven by the Iranian national interests, and this is what's on stake. When we look at the Iranian interventions in this part of the world, we will find that they rely on the weakness of the state. Like, for example, in the Lebanon, there is no state as such. Hezbollah is the ruler in Iraq. There is no state, or there are a number of armed groups supporting Iran. In Yemen, the same. As an Arab, this is a cause of concern for me. First of all, I am against theocracy, a religious rule in all shapes and forms, whether based on the Shiite or Sunni schools of thought. Maybe others give it different names. What people I call is, is Islam, political Islam, or Islam that is works as a political movement. People call them different names like the Muslim Brotherhood or others. I think we need to discuss this further. What we need is the modern civil secular state, which is based on modern organizations and establishments and institutions. The West, unfortunately, has dealt with the Iranians wrongly, in my opinion. The West has one big objective, and that is to deny the Iranians opportunity to have a nuclear option. This is, by and large, correct, but there is a bigger objective, Iran being in our neighborhood. Of course, we know that Iran, if it manages to possess a nuclear weapon, it will not be able to use it, because if they use it against Israel, this will kill half of the Shiite population in the Lebanon. So this is then self-explanatory. The other aspect in this is war. No person in their right frame of mind will think of entering into a war with Iran. The third supposition here that we must convince the Iranians that this project of yours is not acceptable by us. We know demonstrations have taken place in Beirut a year ago, and also in Baghdad, and in the opposition to the Iranian project in Yemen, makes me feel that it has no future. I think, on the other hand, we are required to build an example based on the national state, which is modern, which is civil in nature, which is relates to the civilized world in a positive and open way, and to have an enlightened democratic system. When we build this project, in my estimation. I think a group of there is disconnection in the line with Dr. Al-Rumaihi. In the current Iranian situation, we know that liberties and freedoms in our region vary. In the Gulf states, at least, there is good services. Maybe 80% of households own their houses. They have reasonable income, middle income or above that. Iran, on the other hand, its expenditure is on the increase, the oppression is on the increase, the number of people, unfortunately, who are killed due to political reasons is on the increase. So, therefore, I do not see this Iranian project has any future to be accepted. Maybe it is accepted by our Shiite brothers. And I want to emphasize that not all Arab Shiites are with the Iranian project. Some of them are with it for economic or some intellectual reasons or some because of other interests. But as I said, it's up to us to build our own national system of government. And this struggle has another aspect, which is intellectual, and that is when man is ruled by another man. I think this emanates from man's own desires and not by the dictats of God. And what the Shiites and Sunnis have in common is we had a beautiful example in the past that we can refer to. What is unfortunate also, the West's approach to Iran is a little bit distant from reality. I think strategists in the West are not familiar enough with the dynamics of the region inside Iran and in the neighbor. So all the pressure by Bush followed by Obama, neither was the maximum pressure by Trump was. I remembered what Obama has written in his latest book. Obama, in 8 years of his administration, tried to engage in dialogue with the Iranians. When he got to the White House, he sent a secret letter to Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader in Iran, with the hope of reaching some joint understandings. And as he says, he wrote to Imam Khamenei a very hot. The Khamenei's response was a very heated letter. When Obama showed the letter to one of his advisors, the advisor said to Mr. President, please, do you allow me to give my opinion? He said to him, yes, go ahead. He said, Sayyid Ali Khamenei has shown you his middle finger. So therefore, with these people, you cannot reach any agreements. So therefore, I find myself bound to say that any reasonable outcome with the Iranian regime is a waste of time because their methodology of thinking, the latest story with the killing of the nuclear scientist, that he was assassinated from remotely, from a distance. And this is an attempt to convince people, simple-minded people. This is, in a very brief summary, in a nutshell, my intervention. I thank the center again for allowing us the opportunity. The paper is ready and available in full. I'm ready to any questions. Thank you, Dr. Mohammad. Thank you very much for this very informative and brief introduction. You went to the heart of the matter. The second interventional paper will be by Dr. Gawdat Bahgat on the Iranian foreign policy from Ahmadinejad to Hassan Rouhani. I did not introduce the speakers because you have their short bios and available for everyone. Now I invite Dr. Gawdat also to have his intervention. 15 minutes to please allow me to interrupt you just before you finish, 2-3 minutes before your time is over. Thank you.
Thank you. And
إذا مداخلة الدكتور جودة بالإنجليزية أذكر أيضا
If you're going to present in English, I remind our followers and viewers there is interpretation available. You can choose the icon and click on Spanish for Arabic translation. This is just a reminder. Spanish means Arabic for the interpretation purposes. If Dr. Joseph,
شكرا جزيلا. يطيب لي رؤية.
I will start talking about Iranian policy from Ahmadinejad to Rouhani by making reference to American policy. As you all know, we had election this month, and there is transition from Trump administration to Biden administration. And many people talk about the change in American policy. I strongly believe the change will be more in style than in real policy. American foreign policy, like any country's foreign policy, has been consistent. American foreign policy reflects American values and national interest. The same thing about Iranian foreign policy. It is not only from Ahmadinejad to Rouhani, but even from the Shah regime till today, there is great deal of consistency. There is, from one administration to another, the style is different, but Iranian foreign policy reflects national interest and perceived values or ideology. Iranian foreign policy is shaped by probably this is my main argument, that from the revolution, even before the revolution till today, Iranian foreign policy has been very consistent with very little change. Iranian foreign policy is shaped by at least 4 dynamics. The first one, geopolitics. Iran is one of the largest countries in the Middle East and South Asia. And Iran has been nation state for thousands of years, has very strong national identity. Because of this, Iranian people, Iranian leaders feel they are regional power. Iranian leaders and Iranian people believe their country is victim to foreign powers, from Russia to Britain to United States. And they have been consistent in calling for foreign powers to leave the region and regional powers to work together. Another major factor shaping Iranian foreign policy, besides geopolitics, is nationalism and Islam. The Iranians are different from their neighbors, and like Kuwaitis, like Egyptians, like any nationalities, there is a sense of nationalism, and the government in Iran is interested in the well-being of its people, so nationalism, like in any country. Another is Islam. The Iranians are Muslims, and they perceive themselves as leader of the Islamic world, and probably this explains the conflict between Iran and Israel. There is no territorial dispute between the two countries. From Iranian perspective, Israel occupies Muslim holy sites. From Iranian perspective, it is not Islam against Judaism. In Islam, Judaism is religion, and you are not Muslim unless you respect Christianity and Judaism. But from Iranian perspective, Israel occupies Al-Aqsa Mosque, Muslim holy site, and this is the main reason for the conflict between Iran and Israel. The third force shaping Iranian foreign policy besides geopolitics, nationalism, and Islam is economy. I do not buy the notion that it is Shia, Sunni, or Arab, Persian. The legitimacy of any country depends on if the government can meet the expectations of their people, if people can put food on the table, if there are jobs. So improving the economy has been one major factor shaping Iranian foreign policy. The last dynamic is relations with the United States. The Iranian Revolution was not only economic revolution. It happened in 1979. Oil prices were very high. Iranian had a lot of money, but it was against perceived US penetration of Iranian society and nation. So since 1979 till today, Iranian leaders have been very suspicious of US intention. With this in mind, I will say a few words about Iranian defense policy. Since the revolution till today, the main factor is Iranian leaders understood from the collapse of the Soviet Union that you cannot compete with adversary who is much richer than you are. This is how Soviet Union collapsed, because they competed with United States, US much richer than Soviet Union. It ended, Soviet Union collapsed. Iran is not as rich as Gulf Arab countries. Because of this, they came with asymmetric warfare to challenge, to defend their country, defend their interest by cheaper means. This include naval power, ballistic missiles, and cyber. Iran has invested heavily in its navy, and its navy is one of the strongest in the region. And these small, speedy boats, they do the job from Iranian perspective. Missiles are much cheaper than Air Force. Iranian Air Force basically does not exist. So they have been investing in missiles, and this is why United States, Europe, some Arab countries are very interested in negotiating with Iran about limiting Iran missiles program. Cyber is much cheaper than any other means, and Iran also has invested in cyber. Especially Iran was victim of cyber attack by United States and Israel were reported to be behind cyber attack against Iran nuclear facilities. Conclusion, what this means for Iranian policy under Ahmadinejad, under Rouhani, and future administrations. First, the power of the president is limited. It is true that Ayatollah Khamenei has the final word, but also it is true that Iran is not like Saddam Hussein, Iraq. Ayatollah Khamenei has the final word, but he discuss with other centers of power. The president has some power. the Revolutionary Guard has some power, and there are different power centers in Iran. It is by consent. It is not like Gaddafi, Libya, or Saddam Hussein, Iraq. Iran has limited financial resources compared with its neighbors, and Iran will never engage in arms race. This is why a few weeks ago there was discussion about lifting the arms embargo. Iran has never been as rich as Kuwait, as United Arab Emirates, as Qatar. The Iranians leader understands that they cannot engage in arms race. They would lose. So it will be always this asymmetric warfare, missiles, cyber and drones. There are different styles between different Iranian leaders. And probably the last point I will mention that Iranian policy has been consistent that foreign powers should leave the region and regional powers should work together. Some people claim this Iranian hegemony. I do not agree with this because Iran does not have ambition to occupy any Arab land. From the Shah time, the Shah used to say, we have enough desert in our country. Iran is interested in improving the economy, the life of its citizens. It is trade with Arab countries will be win-win to everybody. Thank you.
شكرا دكتور جودة على هذا الاختصار الرائع وعلى هذا التقديم المميز.
Thank you, Mr. Gawdat, for your intervention. You've talked about the Iranian foreign policy from Ahmadinejad to Rouhani. We move to Dr. Mohammad Ayatollah Tabaar, the associate professor at Texas A&M University, Bush School of Government and Public Service. You'll be talking about the Iran's foreign policy after Rouhani. Please, those who would like to pose any questions, please do so and address your question to the gentleman that you want to answer your question. Please, the floor is yours, Dr. Mohammad Ayatollah Tabaar. 15 minutes. And I might interject you 3 minutes before the end of the 15 minutes. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I'm really honored to be on this panel, and I look forward to our discussions. What I'd like to do today is to give you a sense of what I think is different perspectives in Iran, within Iran's foreign policy establishment on the Middle East. How these views have evolved over time and what all of this means for the post-Rouhani Iran. Since Ayatollah Khomeini's death in 1989, there have been two main perspectives on Iran's policy in the Persian Gulf. One that views the region in terms of deterrence against the United States, and one that looks at the region as a bridge towards the United States. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, the Revolutionary Guards, and a host of hardline factions within the country have been behind this approach, the first approach, the deterrence approach. And I like to call this approach also the regionalist approach, because the foreign policy in this approach is very much focused on the Middle East. On the other hand, Iran's presidents, former presidents and the current presidents, from Rafsanjani to Khatami and even Ahmadinejad in his second term, and current President Rouhani have all advocated the second approach. And I like this, I want to call this approach the globalist approach for the reason that I'll explain in a second. The regionalists are security oriented. They are skeptical of international norms and organizations. They believe that the United States will never, ever come to terms with the Islamic Republic of Iran. And regime change is basically the cornerstone of US foreign policy toward Iran. And this is regardless of which party is in power, that both Republicans and Democrats ultimately pursue regime change, but they have different means to achieve this goal. In this view, US regional allies are simply the extension of the US animosity toward Iran. And because of that, Iran needs to have strong military leverage in the region to prevent and deter the US aggression. So the IRGC's missile program and its ever-expanding network of allies, non-state and parallel state actors in the region are all core components of this approach. Because the assumption is unless Iran is militarily strong, it may end up very much like Iraq, Libya, or Syria. The globalists, on the other hand, led by various presidents in Iran, have long advocated a rapprochement with the United States, but through reducing tensions with the US allies in the region, including Saudi Arabia and even Israel. They're outward-looking, economically focused, and believe in working with international organizations and using diplomatic tools. For them, the region is the Middle East is Iran's bridge to have better relations with the United States and be part of the global economy. That's why I call them the globalists. So the regionalists argue that only a strong and secure Iran could achieve economic prosperity. But the globalists, on the other hand, believe that only an economically prosperous Iran that is part of the global economy will be safe and secure. Security comes through interdependence, they argue. So Iran's foreign policy conduct in the past 30 years since Ayatollah Khomeini's death has been the result of the interactions between these two competing perspectives. And although the Supreme Leader and the IRGC are the ultimate decision makers in Iran, as Dr. Bahgat just mentioned a few minutes ago, other power centers in the country, sometimes they get to decide as well. So Iran's president and foreign minister have often used popular sentiments and moderate elites within the state establishment to convince, constrain, and even outmaneuver the Supreme Leader and the Revolutionary Guards. Sometimes they have succeeded, sometimes they have failed. The point is that these opposing views have often paralyzed Iran's foreign policy and even confused its neighbors. So we hear from Saudi officials and other officials in the region, we don't know which Iran to believe. We don't know whose words to believe. Is it what the Iranian Supreme Leader says or what the Iranian president says? Because they say opposing things, contradictory things. But I want to tell you today that thanks to the experience or negative experience of the nuclear agreement, the JCPOA, and the US maximum pressure policy, it seems that the regionalists have finally won the battle, the internal battle, and subdued the globalists, at least for the time being. Negotiating with the United States has not made Iran more prosperous or secure, as the globalists had long claimed that it would. In fact, Iranian officials now say that even in the worst days of the Iran-Iraq war, the country was never under such economic pressure. And the IRGC now claims that if it weren't because of Iran's missile program, and its regional allies in Iraq, Yemen, Syria, and other parts of the region, the US would have turned Iran into another Iraq. So Iran's deterrence in the region has worked. Now, there is this argument that President Trump is an aberration, and the upcoming Biden administration will join the JCPOA, which will in turn revive the old factional politics in Iran and the globalist camp in the country. But given the strong presence of a Republican bloc in US Congress, the increasing pressure from Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Israel on the Biden administration, on the US, and the ongoing sabotage against Iran's nuclear facilities and the assassination of Iranian officials and scientists, nuclear scientists, President Biden may not be able to make a U-turn and start a new chapter with Iran easily, as many have suggested. In fact, some in Iran are worried that Biden can be even more dangerous toward Iran because he can breach the gap with US European allies and create an international consensus against Iran. Not to mention, there could be another Trump or Trumpist administration in 4 years from now. So the point is, Iran's foreign policy is now solidly moving on a national security, inward-looking, and regionally focused track. And whoever becomes president in Iran after Rouhani will have to pursue this path. Iran's foreign policy elites are now converging and coordinating more than ever. Of course, the blame game and the usual bickering still continue. But there is this realization that their security environment has fundamentally changed. And they have to work together closely now to advance a coherent, not confusing foreign policy with the goal of collaborating with any partner, any friend in the region, and driving a wedge between Iran's rivals and adversaries in the region. Iranian leaders, including the supreme leader, have signaled in recent months that despite the disagreements that they have with some countries in the region, particularly Saudi Arabia, they don't consider it an enemy necessarily, as long as the Saudis don't actively work with the United States and Israel against Iran. Meanwhile, the IRGC is deepening its influence in the region to be able to respond to any scenario. As Iran's globalists are losing hope for a rapprochement with the United States and credibility inside the country, they are shifting to the east to improve ties with China and Russia for economic and security benefits. There used to be a lot of mutual distrust between Iran on the one hand and the Chinese and the Russians on the other. But it seems that now their shared anti-Americanism is bringing them all together, at least for now. Iran has been welcoming these two major powers in the Middle East precisely because it wants to balance the United States. Now, what is going to happen in the next presidential election in Iran in June 2021? In the past, we looked at elections in Iran to predict what kind of foreign policy it would pursue. So the person set the path. When Rafsanjani became president, when Khatami became president, when Rouhani became president, it was a signal that Iran was moving towards showing more flexibility to compromise and negotiate with others, including the United States. Of course, they all eventually failed for various reasons, which I'm happy to discuss in the Q&A. But I think now we need to look at the emerging national security discourse in Iran to predict what kind of president will rise. It seems to me that the parameters that I described a few minutes ago are already set. So this time around, the path will choose the person, not the other way around. And whoever wins will have to be credible and committed enough to carry this national security torch. My sense is that a center-right figure, someone with close ties with the Revolutionary Guards, and yet moderate enough to attract a significant portion of voters will be elected. Someone whom Iran's enemies and rivals will fear and at the same time view as a potential deal maker. Let me stop here, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed, for a nice presentation. And we have time. وعندنا وقت جيد للإجابة على مجموعة من التساؤلات التي وردت، ولكن خلنا نترك إذا كان هناك أحد رافع إيده أو شيء. ما في حد رافع إيده أعتقد. خلنا نبدأ في الأسئلة التي وردتني من خلال المداخلات أو الأسئلة التي جاءت عبر الQ&A. في مداخلة طويلة شوية، مداخلة والسؤال حاولت أني أختصرها بشكل مباشر، وهي موجهة للفاضل الأستاذ الدكتور محمد الرميحي. هذه يعني السؤال أو المداخلة والسؤال أقدر أختصرهم بالآتي: في ضوء موضوع التطبيع مع الكيان الصهيوني وما يثار في هذا الجانب وتداعياته الأمنية والسياسية والاقتصادية، ما هو السيناريو الذي سيحكم مستقبل العلاقات الإيرانية مع دول الخليج في ظل سيناريو
What will be the scenario that will govern the future events?
يعني إذا سمحت لي دكتور يعقوب، أنا عندي بس ملاحظتين على كلام الأخ الكريم.
Please, if you allow me, I have some comments on what Dr. Gawdat has said. Dr. Gawdat said that Iran has no desire of hegemony. I think it's wiser if we revisit this assumption. It is obvious. Khamenei said that we fight outside Iran so that we do not have to fight inside Iran. So this hegemony has really caused a number of Arab countries into failed states or no states like Iraq and Yemen and others. The second point, Dr. Bahgat has said there is no difference between the Shah and the current regime in Iran. I think there is a difference, even if a partial one. The Shah has had, or in fact, had through international negotiations, he reached some compromises and solutions through compromise. The problem with the rulers of Iran, they have no desire whatsoever to engage in any, to reach any medium solutions. So why can't there be a dialogue? Of course, any dialogue can only take place if both sides are prepared and willing. Humanity has seen many conflicts in this world. Ultimately, they reached solutions based on compromise. We have been, in the last 40 years, engaged in this conflict. The no-state situation in Iraq is bad for us. The same applies to Yemen and Lebanon and other places. So therefore, this project really merits some real discussion and some intellectual debate. We all are required to think about it. To move into coexistence, this is the concern of humanity now. I agree with Mr. Mohammad that Mr. Biden will not necessarily be a second Obama or another Obama, because a lot of water has gone under the bridge. The new aspect of the ballistic missiles, the agreement between Iran and China, this will have an impact in the deep state in the United States. Also, Biden's approach towards internationalism and multilateralism, and also to do something about the climate change issues and reduce emissions. Maybe this will impact the use of shale gas and shale oil, and America will need again international energy from this region. As for the question, I'll attempt to answer. I do not have just a conviction, I have information that Israel's relations with our region is there. Some is overt, some is covert. So we must not delude ourselves that some have relations and some don't. This should be revisited. The second issue here, and I'm prepared to listen to the contrary. I'm convinced that the Iranian brothers cannot and have no desire to, will not be able to liberate 1 inch from Palestine. They can continue talking about liberating Palestine, but this is contrary to the realities of the 21st century and life in the 21st century. So when they impose their point of view or interest in dealing with Israel, reminds me of the Contragate and other things when they bought weapons from Israel. The other issue here, and like Mr. Mohammad said, the problem is who should you listen to in Iran? There is some sweet talk coming out from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and some different rhetoric coming out from the Supreme Leader's office. We have no objection to how the Iranians frame their narrative, but our concern is we have a problem that the mentality of Middle Ages is now is imposed on us in this day and age. Finally, so far as the relations between the Gulf countries and Iran is somewhat exaggerated in some aspects of it, and it's rather ironic that if there was any success of the Iranian chaos, Iranian policies producing chaos, it has produced this rapprochement with Israel, whether fully or partially. But we, as Arabs, we have accepted the two-state solution, and therefore exaggerating this aspect as if that things have gone out of control. I think we should revisit that because the two biggest countries with the borders with Israel, Egypt and Jordan, have normalized relations a long time ago, and the Palestinians benefited from that because the Egyptians interfered on more than one occasion to calm down things. And as we speak now, the leader of the Palestinian Authority, Abu Mazen, is in Cairo, and his residence is not far away from the Israeli embassy in Cairo. So let's be reasonable and be realistic and look at things as how they are. Thank you, Dr. Mohammad. I give Dr. Gawdat the floor, and Dr. Mohammad has right to reply afterwards. We take some more questions first. A question to Dr. Gawdat. In question, I'll read it out in English.
Standards of Iranian foreign policy are quite alike to Gulf countries once, and they share many similarities. Why Iran does not seek cooperation and collaboration with this country, or at least is tension in the region? instead of hostility and comforting each other in many zones such as Yemen. دكتور جودة المايك دكتور جودة الميكروفون إذا سمحت.
Okay, thank you very much. And if I may, just 2 points about normalization. One, to normalize relations or to make peace, you are talking about enemies making peace or normalizing relations. United Arab Emirates and Bahrain have never fought Israel. I believe the term normalization is the wrong term. It is basically about selling arms. Again, normalization or making peace is something done between former enemies. The countries which fought Israel are Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, and the Palestinians. And I believe the right approach is not to work with one regional power, Israel, against another regional power, Iran. The right approach is all regional powers, Arabs, Iran, Turkey, and Israel get together and agree on one way to reduce tension and live in peace with each other. But the current approach is to ally with one regional power, Israel, against another regional power, Iran, and to some extent against Turkey. Turkey is not going anywhere. Turkey will always be there. The same thing about Iran and the same thing about Israel and for sure Arab countries. The right approach again is all parties work together and accept each other. For Iran and Gulf states, one major force shaping Iranian policy in the Gulf and every place is regime survival. This is the case in every single country, including United States. Every government in the world is interested in staying in power. The Iranians understand that for the Islamic Republic to stay in power, to survive, it is not by ideology. It is by economics, meeting the economic aspirations of their people. And from Iranian perspective, understanding that Iran is not as rich as United Arab Emirates, as Kuwait, as Qatar, it is in the best interest of the Iranian government, Iranian people, to have good relations with these neighbors. This means investment, trade, this means jobs for Iranians. This peace will benefit everybody. This is why the Iranian leaders have been calling for good relations with Arab countries. And I believe the problem is some Arab countries do not trust Iran and are not willing to work with Iran. As far as I can see, Iran is extending hand to Arab countries. And for sure, Iran is not perfect. No country is perfect. And the Iranian government is interested in the interest of its people. Nothing wrong with this. But they have to get together, work together. Thank you.
شكرا دكتور. نأخذ سؤال آخر.
Now we take another question.
أيضا دكتور جودة.
This is another question to Dr. Gawdat. هل
sanctions similar to Iran? تفضل دكتور جودة. الميكروفون دكتور، الميكروفون دكتور.
Please unmute yourself, doctor.
Again, الميكروفون، سكرت الميكروفون، فتحته وسكرته.
Please unmute your microphone.
سكرت الميكروفون، افتح الميكروفون.
Again, please unmute yourself. We cannot hear you.
افتح الميكروفون. أيوة، ممتاز. ممتاز، تمام، ممتاز.
Yes, excellent. Go ahead, please.
Just a few days ago, there was a report by a very well-respected economic institution, think tank here in DC, that if sanctions are lifted, the Iranian economy will grow by 4%. This is a huge difference. The economy in Iran shrank by 6% last year and is expected to shrink even more in 2020 because of sanctions and because of coronavirus. So the Iranians are dying to see sanctions lifted. What happened, and somebody made reference to the assassination of the nuclear scientist. President Trump is trying his best to poison the well, to make it harder for President Biden to lift the sanctions, to approach Iran, and by assassinating very prominent Iranian nuclear scientist, by imposing more sanctions, he is trying to provoke Iran to engage in military conflict with the United States or with Israel. And the Iranian leaders are under domestic pressure to respond. Like any country, you cannot see senior officials in your country being assassinated. So the choice, the challenge in Iran now, including the IRGC, should they swallow their pride and wait till President Biden takes office and start negotiating with him? Basically, Iran will go back to the nuclear deal, or United States will go back to nuclear deal and lift the sanctions, and in return, Iran will go back to its commitment under the deal. Or the other option is to take some action to respond to this assassination. My understanding so far, the consensus, and this is what President Rouhani said, strategic patience, that Iran will not fall in this trap and be provoked. But like any country, there is pressure to do something. Maybe Iran will reduce its cooperation with IAEA till January 20th, maybe some other measures. Thank you.
شكرا دكتور. ننتقل أيضا إلى سؤال لدكتور محمد رميحي إذا تكرمت. بعد التغيرات السؤال دكتور بعد التغيرات.
There's another question, Doctor. Following the changes of the new administration, what are the horizons of cooperation between Iran and the GCC countries? Unfortunately, our brothers in Iran have no ability to compromise. At one of the Gulf summits in the past, the Gulfers sent a unified message to Iran, asking Iran not to meddle into the affairs of the GCC countries. It was sent by the Kuwaiti foreign minister. The Iranians responded as follows: we don't deal with you as a bloc, we deal with you in silos. So the rope of cooperation was severed then. So here you cannot manage the international relations or any society with ideologies. You need to follow sociology in order to manage any society. So compromise is a must. I think that we'll have plenty of time before we could cooperate efficiently. And I think there are plenty of challenges. There is no direct showdown. There is no war in the horizon from our own perspective. But I think there will be some skirmishes that harass everyone using proxies and using different tools on the part of the Iranian regime. I describe this regime as the undertaker of civilization because he has no project that can be convincing apart from repression. And repression is there in Iran, and repression is there whenever Iran is present in Lebanon, in Syria, in Yemen, and in other countries. So I reckon that the status quo will be prevailing with some perhaps problems and some skirmishes. At one stage, the Iranians thought that having a rapid and brief war is feasible. And we knew that from one of the journalists who accompanied the foreign Iranian minister, and he defected from that institution, and he was very close to the Iranian regime. But as he said, his problem was that there are plenty of secret apparatuses, and no one can be secure from all of them. So he defected, and he left Iran, and he claimed asylum, I think, in Sweden, and he talked about this very issue. So perhaps there is no possibility for cooperation, but the silver lining is perhaps for us to see or to witness an internal kind of change in Iran. Take the hijab of women. The hijab is not mentioned in the Quran, and there is no punishment for a woman to take off the hijab. But the hijab at the time of the Shah was used as a protest symbol against the Shah regime, and now the opposite is taking place. Taking off the hijab is perhaps a symbol of opposing the current regime. So if you hear the Iranians, the Iranian commentators, you would hear indoctrinating kind of rhetoric. They are singing from the same hymn sheet of the supreme leader, and we know from some defectors that the ceiling of freedom is very low. So I think, as I said, things will drag on, and the ideologies will clash. We need to be prepared. And as I said, we need to have our own civil prototype that might attract the Iranians. Thank you, Dr. Mohammad. Another question is addressed to you. Apart from the economics and the politics, what are the frames of the relationship between Iran and the GCC countries, or the determinants of such a relationship? Dr. Mohammad, his microphone is muted, I think. Microphone, please. Yes, sorry. I said yes. We have had deep-rooted relationship with Iran. We are very close to Iran in the Gulf, and vice versa. There are mixed marriages and so on and so forth. And for our viewers and listeners, I would like to say that there are cousins on both sides of the equation. The Iranians at one stage participated in building the economy of the Gulf, and nowadays Iran has economic relations with a number of Gulf countries. The problem lies in politics. The problem, unfortunately, lies in the perception, the illusionary perception on the part of the Iranians. I personally went to Iran during the Khatimi and Rafsanjani's eras, and the society was open to our region. But where is Khatami now? Khatami is under house arrest. Even such openness was short-lived, and that's why perhaps we are betting on a new generation in Iran to understand the intricacies of our relationship. And I think these kind of setbacks might lead to a cul-de-sac or a stalemate, unfortunately. Again, another question addressed to you, Dr. Mohammed. Do you think that Iran conducts itself as if it has a natural kind of ruling elite whereby
التعامل الطبيعي أو أنها تحطم شعوب منها اليمن تحت شعوذة العقيدة والأوهام
it uses the creed and the divine illusions to perhaps repress other peoples like the Yemenis and so on and so forth? How could you deal with those people who believe that they are the sons of the Lord in the land? Yes, Brother Gawdat talked about the Islamic element in the foreign policy of Iran. But Islam that Bahgat's movement is political one, and the political Islam cannot conform with the status quo all across the world or the new trends. There are Muslims in Indonesia, in Morocco, in all across the globe, and every country has a different kind of modus operandi. We, as far as despotism is concerned, we have a problem with repression. And if despotism claims that it has authority straight away from God, then this will be more ominous. This will be a compounding kind of problem. The Iranian regime wants to propagate this idea in the Arab world, and this what keeps me awake at night. Personally, we have no problem with the Iranians and how they govern themselves. They are free to do so, but we have a problem with spreading their tentacles in the Arab world, especially as far as the promotion of the revolution or propagating or exporting the revolution of Iran all across the Arab world. What we want is for the Iranian leaders to be more rational. And Mr. Ahmadinejad lately had published an article whereby he emphasized what I've just said. I think that they are opportunistic. They follow an opportunistic kind of policy rather than a rational one. Before I move to a fourth question that is addressed to you, Dr. Mohammad Ayatollah Tabaar, if you got any comments or any answers, just please go ahead. Dr.
Sure,
Mohammad
thank you.
Ayatollah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think the assumption that I think some people have is that the US, Saudi Arabia, UAE, or other countries in the region, they are interested in working with Iran, and the problem is entirely on the Iranian side. I don't know if this is the view that the Iranians share. I think if you look at what they say, what they think, and how they, what kind of policies they adopt, it seems they think actually that the problem is on the other side. That is, they will never ever accept Iran as a player in the region. And given its size, given its population, its economy, and all the potentials, it's not necessarily about the nature of the regime. No matter what Iran does, countries on the other side of the Persian Gulf will not really come to terms with Iran. They don't really want Iran to become, and this is not necessarily about seeking hegemony. So when Ayatollah Khamenei said that if we don't fight in Syria, we'll be fighting in Tehran, this is not about necessarily seeking hegemony. This is about regime insecurity, that ultimately the United States wants to overthrow the regime, wants to turn Iran into an Iraq. So this is the view that they have on the other side. And just look at the JCPOA. I think one thing that nobody really mentions here is that here is a perfect case in which Iran abided by an internationally endorsed agreement. And what happened? The United States pulled out, withdrew from the agreement, violated an agreement that was endorsed by the United Nations Security Council, and in return imposed all the sanctions, and is trying to bring Iran's oil export to zero. So you are, and Iran sees this as basically a declaration of war. So this is how they feel. They feel they're under siege. And yet some colleagues here, they portray the situation as everybody is just sitting there reaching hands to Iran, and the problem is on the Iranian side. No, as Dr. Bahgat just said a few minutes ago, Iran has tried, at least some elements in Iran have tried to reach out to the Arab leaders, but they don't, they think for a variety of reasons, probably domestic reasons or other reasons, they don't trust Iran. So I think this, we need to be fair and just think that it's not that also not every country is Norway and Switzerland in Iran, and Iran is the only dictatorship in the region. No, that is not the case either. So I leave it at that.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammad. Dr. Gawdat, you raised your hand.
Dr. Gawdat رفعت
الميكروفون دكتور جودة لسه.
Okay, can you hear me now?
اتفضل.
Okay, I want to make 2 points. One, when President Trump lost the election, Foreign Minister Zarif put on tweet, President Trump will leave in 70 days and we will always be here. I believe this is very true, and also this reflects the fact that foreign powers, all foreign powers will leave, and at the end of the day, the Arabs, the Turks, the Iranians, and the Israelis will always be part of the Middle East. They have always been and will always be. And my second point, the main problem between Arab countries and Iran, it is not Shiism, it is not Shia, Sunni, or Persian Arabs, it is geography. Iran is basically too big for some Arabs to trust. This makes sense to me. If you are a small country, 1 or 2 million people, your country was created after Second World War, there is nothing wrong with this. These are facts, and again, there is nothing wrong with this. But your next door neighbor, Iran, has been nation state for thousands of years, has 80 million people. It is hard to trust it just because it is too big, and it is not Iran's fault, and it is geography. Somehow, geography and history created a large country like Iran, next door neighbor to small countries. And these small countries see their security in bringing foreign powers, if it is United States, if it is Europe or Israel or even Turkey. This is the main problem between Iran and Arab countries. The Iranian perspective that foreign powers will leave one day or the other. This is what happened with the British, the Spanish, the Russians, and this is what will happen with the Americans. The Arab countries do not trust Iran, not because of Iran's policy, it is because Iran's size and history. Thank you.
شكرا دكتور جودت. Dr.
Thank you,
Mohammad.
Dr. Gawdat. Dr. Mohammad Al-Rumaihi, we're back to you again, if we may, please. We have two questions. We'll ask them together. Let me just adjust my screen. The coming administration under Biden in the United States, do you think it's looking forward to renew and rejuvenate the nuclear deal between America, Europe, and Iran, which was negotiated through Rouhani?
GCC-Iran dialogue. What role does the UN Security Council play? GCC is also divided more than ever. ناخذ الإجابة على السؤال يا دكتور.
يعني أعتقد الإدارة الأمريكية القادمة.
I think the coming administration, I heard more than one statement, including a special online interview with John Kerry, who said that there's been a lot of water under the bridge between Iran and the United States. So going back to that deal, meaning the nuclear deal with the Europeans, will be rather difficult. If Iran has accepted that, there will be negotiations which may last longer than the 4 years allowed to Biden in power. So I don't anticipate a quick return unless Iran accepted the new conditions. That's about enriching uranium, interfering in the neighboring countries, and intercontinental ballistic missiles. This is the first point. The second point, the mechanisms in the relations between the Gulf countries and Iran. I mentioned part of that. The Gulf countries have tried on more than one occasion to reach out to the Iranians, but they said, no, we want to deal with you on individual basis. This is something which was not accepted by the Gulf. To say that the Gulf countries have divisions, this is somewhat exaggerated. There are sticking points between Qatar and the rest of the GCC, but by and large, GCC countries have a lot of commonalities. Also, the Gulf countries have not tried to provoke Iran. Also, this is known. For example, the UAE has condemned the assassination of the Iranian nuclear scientist. Kuwait has done so too yesterday, and Qatar maybe yesterday or the day before. These countries all prefer peace and security. What is objectionable is the active Iranian involvement, not in these countries, but throughout the world. We know there is an Iranian diplomat who is being tried in France or Belgium, accused of violence he used to exercise against another Iranian group. What Dr. Mohammad has said, there is one more than power center in the Iranian decision-making, and this produces different positions. I said, and I wish I was wrong, we still have a long, dark night ahead of us, and nobody can claim that there is light at the end of this tunnel. Thank you very much, Dr. Mohammad.
Dr. Mohammad, Ayatollah, a question about the reaction of Iran after the death of Mohsen Fakhri. I don't know what's the reaction of the Iran. Do you feel that it will be the same of what happened with Qasem Soleimani or something different?
So far we have seen two types of reactions. One is that Iran should adopt strategic patience and not to react strongly and not to fall into a trap that could escalate into a war and US basically bombs Iran or with Israel, conflict with Israel. Iran should wait until the next president will come to the White House, and then things will change. But there is another view that is coming from. So the first view is coming more from president and the more moderate centers of power. But there's a second view that is coming from the Revolutionary Guards and more hawkish elements in Iran, and that is perhaps the reactions that Iran showed after the assassination of Qasem Soleimani was not strong enough to establish deterrence. That's why they have killed Mr. Fakhrizadeh. That's why these assassinations could continue in the next few weeks before Biden takes office, and that's why Iran needs to do something to prevent this. So now, what they're going to do, I don't know. But one of the things that they have done is within the parliament that is now controlled by the conservatives, they are trying to push forward a bill that would reduce Iran's commitment and obligations under the JCPOA. So that could be one reaction. So, but for sure, Iran is not seeking a conflict now. I think they're going to wait, and at the same time, they're not going to be entirely quiet because these actions will continue. They fear.
Okay, شكرا دكتور.
Thank you very much, Doctor. We have if Dr. Bahgat has anything to say, maybe we have 1 minute or so before we round up. Unmute, please.
My last point, Iran is not crazy country, and Iran is normal country like any country, and Iranian leaders are trying to improve the economy of their country, and Iranian interests are not mutually exclusive with Arab interests. The Kuwaitis, the Emiratis, the Saudis are interested in improving economic conditions of their people, and peace will serve everybody's interest. And it is better not to think about Iran as driven by ideology, exporting revolution, Shiism. The Iranian people, like any people in the world, are interested in jobs, and Iran has many economic problems. So it is better for all countries in the region not to wait till President Biden takes office or not to wait for solution from Washington. It is better to work together, be inclusive. Iran, Arab countries, Turkey and Israel get together, reduce tension, establish economic relations, stop being suspicious of each other and work together. This is good for them, good for United States, good for the whole world. Thank you.
Okay, شكرا دكتور. 3 أمور قبل الختام يعني.
Thank you, Doctor. 3 things before we round up. We have finished on time. Just before we close this session, I want to remind you that tomorrow we'll have a session which will start at 4 o'clock. There is a lecture by Shireen Hunter on the relations between, this is a public lecture on the relations between Iran and GCC. We will start at 4 o'clock, and we invite people to register for the 3rd day through visiting the official site of the center. Finally, I want to thank the organizers. It's rather difficult, really, to manage things through this kind of applications, but honestly, the center has proven their ability to organize things. So our thanks are going to him, and especially Ibrahim, the wonderful person, and Ihab also. They're always with us. And of course, Dr. Marwan, we thank them all indeed, and the rest of the team. We hope that the Gulf Studies 8th forum will be in December with all the GCC countries present, and we hope and we look forward to meeting you all, and all the Gulf countries are together, united again, all present. I just received one final question, but I'm sorry, I do not have time to pose it. Inshallah, God willing, we will meet tomorrow at 4 o'clock.